digital transformation in healthcare. The panel will also help identify partnerships and strategies in building a successful health tech startup. So without further ado, can we have Renee invite the speakers up?
All right, I'd like to invite our fellow panelists. We have with us first Serene Chai, the co-founder of SpeedDoc Singapore. She's the co-founder and head of partnerships and projects at SpeedDoc, and she works with major healthcare institutions for clinical validation of digital healthcare, creating consortiums with industry partners to provide enhanced medical care through digital means, and generally finding new and safe ways to enhance healthcare delivery through technology. Please come on stage, Serene. And next we have Mark Taras, Managing Director of Zenium Singapore. And he's the Managing Director for Zenium, not just in Singapore, but also Malaysia, Indonesia, with 15 over years of experience in business development, sales, strategy, marketing management roles in 3D printing at HP, and consumer goods at Unilever, mobile at Samsung, and a cohort of deep tech startups like now at Zenium. And he has lived and worked in several regions from Barcelona all the way to Southeast Asia. Please welcome Mr. Mark Taras on stage. And lastly, I'd like to have Ms. Ng Lilian, the co-founder and managing director of Tetsuyu Healthcare. She is responsible for strategic and corporate development, marketing and operations. And prior to founding Tetsuyu, Lilian has close to 2 decades of experience in consumer banking, where she drove strategy, marketing, and business management. As head of the personal banking segment at OCBC Bank, she was responsible for the customer value propositions of the clients in the consumer bank. So Lilian and her team at Tetsuyu are pushing the boundaries on elder care technologies with care management, AI wound management, and other applications. And the team was honored with the HIMSS Asia Pacific Excellence in Startup Innovation Award in 2017, Innovation of the Year Technology Award at the 8th Elder Care Innovation Award 2020, and Grand Prize winner for 2021 Healthy Aging Prize for Asian Innovation. Let's welcome her on stage, Lilian. All right, so this is a health tech panel. So our topic is on the next health tech frontier. So I'd like to hear from all of you, what are some of the upcoming trends in the healthcare space and the changing landscape? Let's start with you first, Serene, followed by Mark, and then Lilian.
Hello. Hi. Okay, yeah, I think I've been asked this question quite a lot of times over the last 2 years. And I think a lot of the first thing a lot of people say is, oh, COVID has been a very big driver. COVID has done what every CTO hasn't managed to do. But what I've seen with my own eyes is the increasing sophistication of neighboring industries. And I think one of the previous speakers spoke about this. And what do I mean by that? So if you think about, the technology we're using nowadays, for example, in the healthcare industry, that's usually telemedicine and that's video conferencing. And these are existing technologies. Video conferencing existed, 10 years ago. And what we're seeing now is that 2 years, and we're seeing that these technologies are here to stay. There is a whole new industry, and a whole group of startups that are building a layer on top of existing technology. So what I think is very exciting is, we see video conferencing and then we see AR startups, plugging into telemedicine. Or, we see drone delivery of medicines, where previously it was the last mile delivery riders and humans, are pounding the streets. Now we're seeing drone delivery of medicine. Now we're seeing robot delivery of medicine, hopefully. So that's quite exciting for me to see increasing sophistication in a whole group of neighboring industries. Yeah.
How about yourself, Mark? In the dental industry, right?
So yeah, and just a little bit for context, the company and our company Zenium, we are built to bring smiles, make Asia smile more. And I would say in that context, in the end, adding a little bit to the point, point, is that actually in the end, what is important about all this is what my mic. Okay. Now on. I do have a loud voice as a Spaniard. But so what I wanted to mention is I think that in the end we think of about technology as you need to there's very little disruption. That's the reality. What you're doing is unleashing customer demand. What do customers want? And for example, in our case, it's very customer centric experience. In the end, the technology we're using was actually patented by another company 20 years ago. The only thing is that they are, for example, this company is interesting because they are very R&D focused. R&D, what happens, you basically have a bunch of engineers talking all the time about product solutions, but not consumers. And I think what, in the end, the only thing that really matters is what consumers want. If it's a B2B business, the consumer might be a healthcare provider, it might be an insurance, but in the end, what we've done is simplify the path, make sure that whatever technologies are there are actually adequate to customers. For example, in our case, we built an app. We didn't build an app because we thought that COVID was coming. We built it before because we knew the consumers want to interact in a way that is practical and adequate to what they want. And that's a little bit, did we invent apps? Did we invent telemedicine? No, we made it just easier. And I think this is where innovation in the end comes. There's going to be some disruption in some industries that all of us are not even going to see happening. They're going to be happening 10 years before or 10 years down the line. But what is interesting is what is going to be applied to satisfaction of consumers. And that is the customer, for me, technologies that are going to win are basically products focused on consumer understanding.
How about yourself, Lillian?
Can you hear? Yep. So I think what really struck me in the last 2 years was how COVID actually opened up the minds, right, of many of the care providers that we served. Technology and digitization has always been an important driver in the industry. But there's always a priority, that's more important, right, in people's minds. And a lot of change management that people want to put off because they are chasing other priorities. But with COVID, I've seen that, the transformation of the mind is as much, right, as the transformation of the technology. So the last 2 years, we've really seen how care providers have opened up, their minds and have actually put in a lot of urgency into adopting technology and digitalization, even though it took a lot of pain for them. So I think that actually spells the future for us, whereby no matter old or young, people have come to realize that digitization is real, it's here to stay, and the openness basically will just get more and more. I think that's how I see it, yeah.
So what are some of the challenges and yet the opportunities that you observed in your industry? Serene, please.
I can tell you one challenge lah. I'm not a digital native, right? Technology doesn't work for me like all the time. Okay, I think seriously speaking, one of the challenges I think which was also brought up in the previous panel is hello, I'm back. Yeah, so one of the challenges is that healthcare tends to be a very regulated industry. But I think also what was mentioned was how do you turn a disadvantage into an advantage? And what we saw in the regulated industry was that people or countries in the region started trusting our company because we were a Singapore-based company and they knew that we had gone through the different validation phases in Singapore. And that's how we got a stronger start in other countries and in the region. And I think that speaks to the leadership of the startup.
No worries. Let's start with...
I'm back.
You're back?
I'm back on
So
my
you have
previous
two
mic.
mics now.
I'll just hold 2 mics from now. Yeah, so I think that speaks a little bit to the role that Singapore startup ecosystem plays in the region. And I think that us being so business friendly and allowing us to flourish here has really helped us blossom in the region. I think that's one of the challenges and also opportunities that we're facing in the future.
How about Mark?
I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what she's mentioning, especially when you think about Asia. You have very different regulatory frameworks, and it can become your nightmare if you're not prepared for one industry or the other. And I think one of the points she's mentioning, it's a growing trend, is Singapore is a health hub, ideally, or hopefully a brand that can come. Now we just launched in Japan. We're being quite successful. And I tell you, 10 years ago, you launched a Singaporean brand in probably the most self-isolationist country in the world, which is Japan, which I've sold high-end 3D printing technology in Japan that only was developed in the US or in Europe, and Japanese customers were like, no, but you don't have this service understanding. It's very interesting to years later see that a Singaporean healthcare brand can start to penetrate the Japanese market with all the challenges that requires. But Singapore needs to keep on driving this, building this health hub kind of infrastructure that even Japan, if you can, as we would always say, if you can get to Japan, if your technology can penetrate that market, don't worry, every other market is going to be easy. So I think this is a very interesting opportunity that I think we see in the future.
So since you talk about regulatory issues here, does that affect your go-to-market strategies?
Absolutely. You have, for example, different markets have completely different regulations in every market. And actually, I would say healthcare, in some areas, especially dental area, is relatively unclear. You don't have, for example, Europe is much simpler in terms of regulation. You have very clear, everything is written. It's a system of written laws, very slow processes, but very clearly determined Ministry of Health. In Asia, it's a little bit, I wouldn't say looser, but it's very much more, you have to kind of discover the path. And that means that some market you might go, have a very aggressive strategy, you think this is an incredible opportunity, and suddenly you discover that that gray area was, there's a barrier there that you couldn't determine. So this has happened to every company, I would think, in Asia, and that changes your go-to-market because the way you might approach customers might be regulated completely different. Direct marketing in some of the markets in Asia is prohibited. So you have to find a complete alternative to our model. Our model is a direct marketing model. So yes, you need to adapt. You need to adapt your product. You need to adapt your go-to-market. You need to adapt your customer service. Some countries do not accept customer service not implemented in their own country. You know, there's tons of regulation. Yeah.
Wow, so much details to take note of. How about yourself, Lilian?
Yeah, so I think the challenge obviously is that even though it's digitization, there's also a lot of face-to-face interaction that's important, because in the digitization journey, a lot of that collaboration with customers to understand their workflow and also the training, right, to teach them actually how to use our system, especially the AI-enabled system. It's not something that can be done completely online. So in our process of onboarding clients during the COVID period, we actually found it to be fairly challenging, I would say, where we literally had to do Zoom meetings whereby we literally have to visualize how they're using the technology. So a lot of innovation also started to evolve because we started to think, how do we actually bring the whole training into a virtual platform? How do we use videos to supplement? And also, how do we use competency tests, right, to actually gauge how well they are doing? So some of these challenges, like some of the speakers spoke about earlier on, actually allowed us to pivot a little bit in terms of how processes are done even internally. So we are forced, right, to become more innovative in terms of how we do things. But opportunities are really plenty. I think, our sector, to some extent, is considered a COVID lift sector. So in this COVID lift sector, you find that the openness for our products really has, gone, from leaps and bounds. And in fact, as far as Japan, for example, we were able to convince many mobile nurse stations to try us out, right? Because during the COVID period, because of the lockdown, a lot of the wound patients in Japan couldn't get wound visits. So there was no choice, right? They had to really embody some of these new technologies to allow the patients to at least receive some care, right? And because of that, we were able to, bring about, the pilot and successfully really get the outcomes, which now allows us to go for the next stage, which is to get the reimbursement strategy policies changed within the Japan, governmental framework, reimbursement framework itself. So Singapore, likewise, I think, during the COVID period, like I mentioned earlier on, people were not able, right, to do a lot of this so-called documentation work remotely. So overnight, they realized that, the quest for digitization must happen, it must happen fast. And resulting from that, we were able to really close deals, even though, during COVID period, people haven't even met us face to face. Many of the deals were actually done completely online. So that was actually a real, morale booster for the team as well. Yeah.
Wow, fantastic. So, I mean, what are some consideration factors, right, and the do's and don'ts in, implementing digital transformation in the healthcare sector? Serene.
I think one thing to remember is that digitalization is an enabler, it's not the end goal. You don't digitalize for the sake of digitalization. You don't digitalize because, for example, you don't create an app just because every other competitor out there has an app. And something that, my colleagues and the rest of the executive team at our company always says is, we are not competitor-centric, we are consumer-centric. So we don't chase what our competitors are doing, or we don't chase the latest sexy thing on the market, but we think about what's easiest for our consumers, and that's patients. And that's even more important because by the time we meet our consumers, they're not feeling their best, right? And so it's even more important for us to make sure that we're consumer-centric. So I would think that that's a do and a don't. So you always make sure that you're adding value to the people that you serve, and not doing something to serve yourself or serve the image of your company.
So I'm piggybacking again, but I think that the very interesting part that we're in her point about focusing on what customers want is what happens with big companies. I've worked with really big companies like Unilever, Hewlett Packard, Samsung, and in the end, there's a lot of doing whatever there's an internal need to, okay, everybody's having an app, let's go to it. And the other day I saw this article about in Europe how this gigantic insurance group was working with a startup enabling this service for customers. And I was in my mind is, how is it possible this hegemon of a company is incapable of developing this innovation, and a startup has done it? And I think this is exactly startups or medium-sized companies burn cash, so they need to do what customers need. No glory projects for a vice president. It's just you do it or you die. So this is why sometimes when you think why innovation comes from the SMEs or the startups, is because it's a do or die effect. You can only do what is required. And this is what we were doing. And in the don'ts, very clearly, privacy, I think, is a thing that when you're running very fast, some companies don't consider sufficiently, and this is absolutely critical. We've put it in the core of all our developments, and I believe that eventually this will come back to hit some companies that aren't really prepared to protect customers and their data and their consciousness, because maybe regulation is not as strong as in Europe, for example, here, but eventually consumers are going to want, and I think Zoho team was mentioning a little bit, the value of the privacy at a B2B level, but especially at a B2C level eventually.
Lillian.
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback on Mark as well. I always pick his line as well. So yes, I think truly, the do's and don'ts are indeed as what the two speakers have already said. The do, of course, it's really to focus on what really the consumers, or for that matter, our customers need. What they want sometimes is not necessarily what they need. What they want could be built out of perhaps certain, biases that they may have, or certain perspectives that they may have, and that sometimes it may not be right. So our role sometimes is also to give them that added, value add of telling them what can go wrong, right? What can go wrong? So the do's really is to focus on what they need, and based on what they need, come up with solutions, hopefully in an inexpensive manner, so that they can get to the end point with our solution. So I've also seen that there are many care providers out there that look at what they call cutting edge technology, and they think that they can, right, also implement that. But what is also not thought through sometimes is that it could be a little bit ahead of their own organizational readiness, right? So we've heard a lot of things like geofencing, a lot of AI, a lot of AR, and some of the more enthusiastic, CIOs or CTOs will say that let's do this, right? But when you look at their crew, you realize that that's not the crew that's going to be able to really embody something like this. Maybe in 5 years, 10 years, but not now. If you're switching from a manual process to a digital process and you want the full 9 yards, that's not going to be possible, and it's probably going to stretch and fatigue, right, their crew members. And I think that's what we've also advised them to really take it a step at a time. Not that we don't want to make the money, but really, even if you do have it, it might actually do more harm than good. Yeah, so that's what I think the do's and don'ts would be.
So
Yeah.
you think it's people first, then digital second when they're ready?
I think it is complementary. I think, we are at this tipping point whereby everybody realizes that there's no way we can escape, right, this digitization. There's no escape. But it is pacing it at the level where people actually understand how to rein in the technology. And as Mark alluded to, confidentiality, data privacy is also something that people need to worry about. And there's always a resource constraint, right? So we have people who said, oh, can my, employees use their personal handphone, right, to do an app? And I'll point to them, of course, as a provider, the more you have, the merrier it is. But for your own good, you must consider the fact that, do you want your customers' data to be on your employee's handphone, right? And if they leave the country and you are not, very vigilant in taking out these accounts, you are taking that patient data out of the country as well. So these are considerations I feel some of the less advanced, players in the market are not quite in tune yet, right? So there's still a lot of the education that needs to be in the marketplace in terms of what does it mean, right? Of course, digitalization, there's no escape. But what does it mean? What are the issues that you'll be confronted with? And providers like ourselves have that responsibility to do a bit of the education as well. Yeah.
So it seems that building an ecosystem is also very important in ensuring the success of your business, right? In your case, of course, you work very closely with doctors, dentists, right? Yourself with the healthcare providers, and then also with consumers and then patient data. Share with us what are some of the strategies in ensuring success in that ecosystem, then the business could run in the market that you are launching. Yeah.
Some of the strategies for success. Well, I think some of the strategies are a little bit confidential.
Ecosystem-wise.
Ecosystem-wise. So I think the thing, maybe 5 years ago when we thought about ecosystems, when we thought about the famous ones, for example, the Apple ecosystem and how it all works together, and we thought about the Amazon ecosystem, how the Amazon, has a hardware, has a software, has warehouses. And that's the old idea of thinking about ecosystems. And now when we think about ecosystems, we have to think about them as ecosystems within a timeline. And this is what you're doing at this point in time. But what are you doing now that might affect your company 20 years down the line or 30 years down the line? I'll give you a very salient example of that. Are you collecting data in such a way that it's safe 20 years down the line, right? And we're not just talking about data breaches here. One of the most famous or well-known healthcare breaches in Singapore was actually not a data breach, it was a human breach, right? It was a disgruntled boyfriend of a disgruntled ex-employee, and what happened was that he had saved some patient data in his computer, and the ex-boyfriend actually exposed it to the media. And this was one of the most well-known data healthcare breaches in Singapore, and it was a human breach. So what are you doing today, that might affect the company and the patients that you're serving down the line? And I think as healthcare and as medicine becomes a little bit more personalized, right? Right now, we're already talking about DNA technology. We're talking about testing the protein sequences within your body. And what does that mean for not just your patient, but something that is so, singularly granular to you? What does that mean for the privacy of the patient's families, right? I think 23andMe also had this idea. If my twin sister or my brother happens to take a test, what does that mean for my DNA? Because now I can calculate what's the likelihood that I did something based on, a test that my sister did. So I think it's very important to view ecosystems within a timeline nowadays, ever more so than it was in the past.
Mark.
In our case, I think that it's a little bit simpler. I think that my two co-speakers, I think in the dental community, we're developing a way forward in terms of what consumers want. We're developing a simpler ecosystem, what I believe is comparing to the Apple one or very technologically complex ones. What we do want is to build relatively simple systems that just deliver the value that customers want. And I am not too keen on the value for the dental community. I do think that there's important regulation, and then that part of the health, let's say the healthcare industry, the Ministry of Healthcare, that's very important to set very clear frameworks. But I believe that it's going to be less of an ecosystem play, and it's going to be a more direct approach to consumers. Is not so important in the dental industry specifically as it would be in other more complex cases, like my colleagues.
Lillian?
So I think the way I visualize the word ecosystem is a little bit different from maybe Mark and Serene. I feel that when we pursue this word ecosystem, at least in the context that I've been working on, it's about looking for like-minded co-creators, right, of a vision. So the most important ingredient is a shared vision. So for example, the AI-enabled wound system, right, that we have, was founded out of a necessity by the community care services to be able to do good wound care, right, in the patient's home, right, or even in a nursing home whereby most of their staff are actually not very good with wound management. So there was a problem statement that was owned, right, by the different care providers that we worked with. They will not have the solution, right? They have a problem that they've framed. They do not have a solution, but they definitely understand what are the ingredients that will work, right, to have a solution that can help them. So for us, we are technology enablers, and we have AI partners, and we also have other clinical partners outside of Singapore that can add value to this conversation. So what started off as a conversation became a shared vision, and then we put the building blocks together, and voila, you have a product, and you have the ecosystem that created the product together. And I think everyone plays a role, and that, I think, brings power into the ecosystem and also gives us the sense of a shared accomplishment, because this is not just my baby, this is our baby. So I think that's how I see it, yeah.
Right, fantastic. And we have a question from the online audience as well. And there's this question with regards to, technology-based assessments and interventions are important therapeutic tools that clinicians can integrate into their work with clients. So how effective are these approaches that you mentioned, right, or your digital approaches, and how do you deal with behavioral health treatment and also with recovery support? Who would like to take that? Okay, Lillian first and then Serene, okay?
Okay, I'll try. Okay, I think that's a very big question, and honestly, it's also a very loaded question because there are many, many parts to it. So, of course, therapeutic regime using telemedicine is not new. I think, many of us have heard about the IBM Watson, and there are many AI-enabled type of algorithms out there. So in Japan, when my co-founder basically, is helming a telemedicine company, they do have a lot of all these AI-enabled questionnaires that's helping to do first line, what they call first line type of management, right, of chronic diseases or maybe even cancer. Are they effective? Yes, they are, because they are first line, and they're termed first line because they eradicate some of those very commonly known issues about a person who is suffering from a specific chronic disease. But it is not enough, beyond, right, understanding some of the common issues, because medicine is actually very personal, right? After I've gone through the questionnaire, actually, there is still this need, right, for the doctor to be actually talking to you for the next 2 to 3 minutes so that they can size out beyond what the questionnaire asks. Are there other issues that may be confronting you? So I would say that, regardless of how automated this process is, we cannot take away the human factor that care, right, really is about. So it helps to maybe shorten that time, because what used to take maybe 7 minutes, probably you now only need 2 minutes or 3 minutes, because the computer does a lot of these calculations for us. But the last 3 minutes actually is the last 1 mile, which is probably the most important 1 mile in care, which is the human interaction to know what exactly is wrong with that person. Yeah.
Serene?
I think Lillian touched upon it very well, and I think my only addition to what she said was, we've always been of this mindset that technology is not there to replace a human. Technology is there to augment the human's decisions. And I think this is very clear in healthcare, because you can get it down to 99.9%, but it still takes that 0.1%, of a doctor's intuition, right, of a doctor's experience in saying that that's not right, that doesn't fit, right? It's not something that can be replaced by technology, at least not now. And I think that's how we're viewing it. In regards to technology affecting therapeutic or changing behavior, I kind of see it. Okay, it depends on how you're talking about digital inclusion. Right, and I'll give you an example. So I know of a company that built a very sophisticated system. It was about medicine reminders, and it plugged into this and that and IoT, and lights would flash and reminders would go off on the SMS reminder if a certain loved one didn't take their medication or something like that. And when I heard about this, and when a couple of my colleagues and a couple of my friends heard about this, they said, "Oh, why don't they just set a reminder on their phone?" Right? So again, it's how you look at technology, right? A reminder on your phone is also technology, right? And this sophisticated system with bells and whistles is also, it's also technology. So it really comes down to how you view technology. And I do think there is a role to play. Take digital management of chronic diseases, for example. There is a role to play in reminding you that it's time for a refill, right? Or, going into a more sophisticated, being able to detect whether you have a likelihood of your illness worsening if you don't change the medicine, or even a reminder that new therapy is on the market, new research has shown that this new drug works. And that's how you can use technology tools. So it's really how you view it. But I don't think that the value is in the technology in itself, it's in the value that it adds. Yeah.
If augment, I've got one more point that I thought might be worth sharing. So I think in the whole telemedicine so-called tide that we're riding, what has become also more clear is the whole concept of power to the people, right? So probably pre-COVID, because telemedicine in many markets is not considered a mainstream, right? And many doctors can define how do they want to relate to the patient. So come to my clinic, wait 10 hours or whatever, and see me, right? So that was the only way in which we knew how to interact with a doctor or a medical person. But this COVID period basically has transformed, right? And to some extent, because knowledge become a lot more available, there is more power now on the consumer to define on what terms they want to relate to the clinical staff. And actually, that's interesting because we are seeing a shift of power. And pharmacists in the past has always found it very hard, right, to get doctors to collaborate, in this telemedicine space because Manila is a bit less in the online space. But today, because it is the consumer themselves that's asking for it, it becomes more difficult for the medical provider, right, to say that I don't want to do it. So this is an interesting shift of where power now is actually coming in from the consumer side rather than just the provider side of things.
Mark, any points to add?
I just wanted to piggyback on that, exactly this. Normally, the established system resists to any innovation because there's like a steady revenue stream, a steady workflow. But the key is once the information is in the hands of the consumers, they can make a choice and they can drive that change in behavior. And that's exactly, I'm very aligned. I'm very aligned. This will drive prices down, will improve quality, will especially give control to the customer. If you think of healthcare, for good and for bad, there's many reasons the consumers don't have to have control over their own treatments, but there's many areas where they could have control, and actually that power is going to change a lot the way healthcare is done.
Interesting question is, as you talk about digital transformation, you said that consumers are asking for it, right? But of course, it's the digital natives, those who are savvy enough, the youngsters, and you take care of elder care, right? That's the interesting part. And then the elderly will be saying, suddenly I'm going online to meet the doctor. Is it trustworthy? Is this doctor, how can I do this? How can I tell the doctor how I feel, right? So, is it patient ready? I mean, do you think that this is the wave where patients are ready to take on digital health tech, right?
I think this is a bit of a push and a pull. Definitely, if things are, stable, nobody will automatically try to make that work. But I think COVID kind of pushed people to a corner. No matter how digitally unsavvy you are, Serene and I were just talking about it just now, right? I mean, if between going to the hospital and your family members cannot see you in hospital, but, and actually, versus, for example, being able to see a doctor at home through the computer with your loved ones with you, what do you choose? Right? I mean, I think that's the reality which we are confronted with. So I think human beings are resilient, we are survivors. At the end of the day, if this is what it takes, right, to live one more day, right, and have the quality of life, why not?
So basically empowering the patients instead. Any question from the floor? We could take one question. Any question from the floor? All right, just raise your hand and the mic will be given to you. All right. And this is one last question and then that we could take. Right.
So in terms of the healthcare industry, is there any possible chances to create new jobs for those for those who want to venture in startup?
Oh, so new jobs, meaning there will be some being displaced, right? So then are there new jobs in the startup space?
Can Can I rephrase your question? So I think we're internally trying to see your question. So you're saying in the healthcare space, are we seeing, creation of new jobs or new industries that we haven't seen before? Is that your idea? Then I think the answer is yes, right? I'll give you an example. I think 2016, 2017 was when, last mile delivery got very big in Singapore, and you were starting to see the Ninja vans, and you were starting to see the Lala moves and Go-Go vans, right? And those were people pounding the pavements. And recently we found that there was aggregators and optimizers of last mile delivery services, right? So not just are you looking at aggregators, which is Lala Move, right? So Lala Move is a gig economy aggregator, right? You find gig workers and you farm them out, but now you are finding aggregators of aggregators. And I think this is something that's being repeated. I need to hold the mic further up, like this. Ah, okay. See, so I'll give you another example, right? I graduated in the year shall remain anonymous, but I graduated, sometime between the last 5 and 20 years, right? And
It's a long range.
so I graduated sometime in the last 5 to 20 years, and when my batch and the batch above me graduated, they were getting jobs that were previously unheard of. So, for example, one of my friends, right out of school, he was actually, appointed social media manager of a very big company. And this was a job that had never existed before. And that's because actually social media took off when I was in university, and he ran like a meme account that was scolding the university, and that was the job experience. He went in and got a social media manager at a very, very big firm. And now you can't imagine any firm worth its salt that doesn't have a community manager or social media manager. And I think that is what we're facing right now. You're seeing industries pop up, neighboring industries pop up. And there'll be jobs today that you haven't seen before, and there'll be jobs tomorrow that you haven't seen today. Yeah.
Mark, what do you think?
Of course. The healthcare industry is growing. Obviously, the older the population gets, just by demographics, it's going to keep on growing. People want control. There's going to be jobs, and exactly what Serena is mentioning, there are going to be more and more jobs. Are there going to be in Singapore? This is the key. I would say yes, because I believe Singapore is becoming a technology, obviously, a startup, obviously, but also a health hub. So yes, Singapore would be a good location if you want to find a job in healthcare.
All right, we've come to the end of this segment. All right, Gracelyn, if you'd like to sum up. All right, but before you go, of course, we've got a little token of appreciation for our speakers.
Yes, thank you very much, Serene, Mark, and Lilian, for very insightful sharing, because, there's a lot of motion now in the healthcare front. Patient experience is changing very rapidly, so everybody's very focused and concentrated, because I think this is all the hype there is today in real time. So can I invite the speakers to take a group picture as well? All right, guests, we will now take a short break. Meanwhile, here's the next poll for you. What do you hope to achieve from this summit? So please do your poll. We have a gentle reminder to complete day 1 survey on your app to be eligible for the lucky draw. And there will be a prize for the most active app user. So please make sure that you are being active on your app. Take some nice pictures and participate in the activity feeds. Yeah. So it is right now 4:18. Can we regroup here at 4:25 for the next topic? Thank you very much.